Hello everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope we're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this weekend ending in August 1st. But before going any further, please make sure that you smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification turned on. That way you know every time a new video goes live on the channel. And please share this video if you find it informative or in any way entertaining. So we now have some numbers, and boy oh boy, we have got some flops on our hand. We have one flop in the making, which is the brand new Disney Jungle Cruise film that just came out, and we have one that has now been firmly established as a flop in the Paramount film Snake Eyes, which again, no one ever asked for, because one of the coolest aspects of the character of Snake Eyes from huge fans of that franchise is the fact that no one knows a lot about his history, and his whole past is shrouded in mystery. And so to make a film where your entire goal is to not only let him speak, even though he's a character that is also known for not speaking, but then also to give a full breakdown of his history and past is just nonsensical. And guess what? No one really showed up for it, and it's going to result in a massive financial loss for Paramount. So as you can see, Jungle Cruise has now come in with $34 million, coming out at over 4,000 screens. This is about $2 million more than what the last projections were stating. I did a video yesterday because there was some early Saturday AM numbers that we could look at, and they had upped the projection from 30 million to around 32 million, and so it looks like the film actually is even going to overperform that, making it around $34 million. The issue is that even though it sounds like it might be a good thing, right, overperforming, right, is that it is still only $34 million on a film that cost $200 million to make, and it barely made anything overseas either. And with this film not getting a China release to bolster those numbers, even though it's really fool's gold, because you have to take into account most studios don't get, right, studios in general from the West don't get 100% of those box office. They only get about 25% when it comes to China, because the vast majority of that money goes to the Chinese communists. So you kind of have to take that always with a grain of salt when you have that China number. But in this case, they are not having a China release, at least at this point. And so there's nothing really that's going to help spin the narrative that this film could possibly be successful. I mean, they're even trying to push out the Disney Plus numbers again this week, which I still am amazed that they are still reporting that, with the lawsuit and the potential other lawsuits that might be coming down the pipe for them because of this day and date release on streaming. But hey, they're still trying to claim that this film made $30 million worldwide on Disney Plus, which makes this film still come in under $100 million for the opening weekend. And remember, that's just what they are claiming the film made, and it's really hard for us to really take that data any seriously, because they are not actually giving us financial information as far as a full breakdown of how all of the breakdown of those numbers actually works, which means that we are left to assume that they're being honest, but it's Disney, and Disney is never really known historically to be the most honest of companies. But as you can see here, we also have The Green Knight, which is a film that I got to see. I did a review for actually my locals, Patreon, Subscribe Star, and YouTube members at the Keeper the Bifrost level and above already. It's about a 6-minute initial instant reaction review. I do plan to do a full review for the channel, but in the end, I'm kind of still in this middle ground with the movie. There's parts that I'm absolutely in love with. I actually love those parts so much that I want to buy the movie on 4K when eventually it comes out on 4K. But there's also parts that are a little bit too artsy for me that I'm not a huge fan of. But again, I'm in this kind of middle ground. This is absolutely an indie film, though. In fact, there is an interview out there where the director made it a very clear point to try and make this film. Actually, he tried to make it under a $10 million movie, but obviously with the special effects in the movie, it ended up costing a little bit more. And because of that, I think he says it comes around $22.5 million. He doesn't give an actual number, but he says that it's low enough of a budget for it to still be able to make it to the Spirit Awards, the Independent Spirit Awards, where it is all about films coming in underneath a certain threshold, which is around 22.5. And so the fact that they were able to make that movie and use and have the visual effects, you know, including some CG effects, even though I think the fox in the movie does not look good at all, but the knight looks freaking fantastic. I think that they did a lot with the money that they had at the time. And so I'm actually, you know, in general, a pretty big fan of the movie. That came in with $6.7 million, which is really not a whole lot, especially for a film that, you know, even though it's a lower budget film, costing under $22.5 million, it still costs enough where they're going to have to make a little bit more than this in order to make some of that money back. Though apparently, according to the people who are associated with the movie, a lot of the budget of the film has actually already been covered by some foreign numbers. And so, you know, it's kind of still hard really to tell where that will fall financially. But as you all know, I only cover what the actual box office numbers are stated to be, and then based off all my presumptions on those numbers, because again, numbers are real and they're tangible, and there's something that we can actually actually look at and actually dissect. Whereas, hey, hearsay and, oh, we claim and we say that we've been covered by X, Y, and Z. Again, it's really hard to really kind of, follow that. The movie Old, which I also got to see, was not a big fan of that movie. It's kind of a bit of a narrative mess, to say the very least. That came in with a 60% drop from last week, making $6.7 million. So even though it has a 60% drop, this movie is now profitable. So congratulations, M. Night Shyamalan Ding Dong. You have made a successful movie during the pandemic. Anytime you hear another studio or a major studio at that say, hey, guess what? It's the pandemic. That's why we're not making any money. I look at all of these lower budget films. That's right, Disney. Lower budget films. Do you remember whatever those used to be? Do you not know how to make a lower budget movie these days? Because it seems like you need to start doing that, because you're kind of losing hundreds of millions of dollars over the past year and a half with these giant big budget films that no one actually wants to see. But Old, not costing as much, and also being able to entice enough people to go see it, is indeed already in that profitable territory. Black Widow is actually still doing well, all things considered. I still have that movie projected to be a flop. There is a small chance that it could make some net gain profit, but that is also taking into account the fact that they likely will not have any positive receipts from Disney Plus when everything's said and done if the lawsuit that Scarlett Johansson has brought forward gets even to the point of them settling. It means that likely they would give her some kind of money. And I saw some people leave in the comments saying they're not going to do that. They're not going to just lay down and die. They're going to keep on fighting. The problem is that it's a giant PR nightmare if Scarlett Johansson does not get even a cent, because now you have the hashtag #MeToo crowd and a bunch of other people like that, a bunch of political activists involved, and are really trying to shame Disney in a lot of ways. And I think that is actually going to have a lot bigger impact, because remember, even though we know in the real world that those people make up a very small portion of society, for some reason these studios and mega corporations believe that this group on Twitter that can make a lot of noise but actually doesn't result in a large number of people somehow, some way have a financial impact, even though they don't. And it's clear by the fact that they've been trying to appease them with all of their movies and all their products, and they've ended up losing money and losing fans, to say the least. Another film, Stillwater, another independent film, came out with $5.1 million, which, again, even in this time, even for an independent film, that's not a very good showing there. So we'll have to, of course, wait and see what the final numbers are. And Space Jam 2 continues to be a massive financial failure, but not as big as Snake Eyes. We'll go ahead and dive into these full numbers, though, and you'll see why Snake Eyes is going to be a massive flop. So as I said, Jungle Cruise has now come in at $61.7 million worldwide. That is abysmal. Again, for a $200+ million movie, that's not even counting marketing, this film making less than $100 million in its opening weekend, and also having made less internationally especially, is not a very good sign. Obviously, you're going to have people who are going to try and claim, yeah, but you had to add the $30 million from Disney Plus. And again, you can take that number with a grain of salt. But even if you try and spin that, you're still looking at a movie that made under $100 million in its opening weekend. All you're going to see from this point on are the numbers continue to drop. That this movie is not set to be released in any other major countries that are going to be able to provide any massive amount of financial income, even though that doesn't make any sense, financial income. Sometimes I say weird things that don't make a lot of sense, but the fact that this movie is not having a closer 40-60 split, because in big budget films, normally you see a 40% domestic take and a 60% international take, and sometimes it can be even more than that. Typically, though, you do see a large haul coming in from the international marketplace, but we're not seeing that with this movie. And so with that in mind, and with the fact that the domestic box office is probably not even going to reach $100 million because of that, it's just not looking like it's a very good situation for Disney. Another massive big budget film that no one is going to see, even if you count the Disney Plus numbers, which is going to result in it being a financial failure. I had one person randomly comment yesterday on the update I did yesterday saying this movie's not going to flop, and I'm like, are you looking at the numbers? Do you see the numbers? Because based on the actual raw box office, it absolutely is going to. Green Knight, as I mentioned, is a independent film, and so it's coming in at $6.7 million in the domestic box office. Not likely going to be able to have any other numbers really added on to this a whole lot. It's got a 20-day theatrical window as an independent movie. Apparently, as I said, though, there are people associated with the movie that say a lot of the cost of the film has already been covered by numbers that they've made overseas, but again, these really aren't being reported, and so I really can't take those any seriously because I need to have actual numbers in front of me to be able to break those things down further. Old has now made $48 million. I just did that again. I don't know why. Old has made $48 million, which is not a whole lot of money, but for a film that cost as much as it did, it is actually now in the financially successful territory. Black Widow is, again, doing a little bit better. as far as the legs on this movie are actually doing better than some might expect it to. And as you can see, as I mentioned with that split, normally you have a 50-50 split or a 60-40 split with more of the money coming from international numbers. So this is a little bit closer to that, though it's a lot closer to being the 50-50 split. 167 domestically, 176.5 million internationally. So that is a film that is, again, under $400 million. There's a chance that it can reach and go a little bit past. I think the highest number I had for this film was 477. I doubt it's going to make it to that number, but hey, anything could happen. The legs on this film could actually be a lot better than people suspect. I just don't suspect that. And this film is very much still a massive financial failure for Disney, especially if the lawsuit is going to result in them losing any money, which, again, as I mentioned before, because of the politics behind the situation, could very well happen. Stillwater's independent film, $5.1 million, probably won't make a whole lot. Haven't really heard anything about this film not having to make a whole lot money back, so all I have are the numbers to really base that off of. Space Jam 2, still abysmally at $118 million. Remember, this was also a gigantic $200 million film, and the fact that it's not even going to get close to reaching that number is, I think, saying and speaking volumes. And they can try and claim all they want about HBO Max, taking care of sales, but this is a movie that you would suspect to be able to be a massive hit even if it was being released onto a streaming service. This is something that would be a guaranteed hit in most years. And so it makes me kind of happy, the fact that even though, of course, they're going to blame the pandemic, as all the studios are, and a lot of people are making excuses for these companies, it just makes me happy that people really aren't going to see this movie because, again, no one asked for it. Speaking of films that no one asked for, if you thought that was bad, Snake Eyes. $23.8 million worldwide, and that means this film is going to be, that's right, a $100 million plus loss for Paramount by the end of its run. But let's go ahead and break down some of these numbers. So as I mentioned with Jungle Cruise and The Green Knight, so with Jungle Cruise, you have a film that cost $200 million, $300 million with marketing. So after the first weekend, the film is sitting at a negative $262 million loss, even if you count the Disney Plus numbers, which, again, I think you have to really take with a grain of salt. You're still looking at a film that needs to make $230 million back before it breaks even. Remember that they don't get 100% of the receipts except, theoretically, the Disney Plus receipts, and even then, it's not going to make another $30 million next weekend. It's probably going to top out at, $70 to $80 million max by the end of its run worldwide. So you're looking at a movie that is going to have to make roughly $200 million back at the box office. And again, 60% of that is actually going to the studio. So this movie is already at a very bad pace, and it's going to be interesting to do the predictions next weekend because, I always make my projections based off the week 2 numbers. I look at the week 2 drop-off, and if it's already at 61 million, and typically you see like a 50% drop, you're looking at a movie that's going to be, $91 million, maybe a little over $100 million if you count the week showings. That's just not very good. Again, $100 million by next weekend, max $150 million. I think that might even be stretching it. That is not a good look for this movie, and it really does spell a massive disaster, another massive financial disaster for Disney. As I said, The Green Knight, $6.7 million, means the film is at negative $28.9 million. They claim that a lot of that has been taken care of, but we don't have those numbers in front of us, and so we just assume that they still have to make a fair amount back in order for it to break even. Same thing with Stillwater, making just a little bit less than The Green Knight, but also costing a little bit less too, and so it only has to make $26.9 million back in the long run. But as I mentioned with Snake Eyes is this movie right here with $23 million in its second weekend. Right now it's sitting at negative $117 million. This film is projected to lose anywhere between $111 million or $103 million. The best case scenario for this movie is that it loses $100 million. So I know any fans of OG Snake Eyes, any fans of G.I. Joe, any fans of the actual original content, from what I've been told from those fans that are either rejecting this film outright or just hate this film outright, I assume that they are going to be very happy to hear that this movie is not making any money and is going to be a massive loss for the company that made it. So again, kudos to y'all. As I mentioned with the movie Old, $48 million worldwide, meaning the film is going to make somewhere between 14 and 31 million by the end of its run. It is already profitable. It's already made $2.1 million in net gain profit, and it'll only go up from here, so congratulations to you. We have still, with Space Jam, $118 million, $153 million loss still for that movie, which again was projected to make, or lose rather, $100+ million at the box office. And of course, we have some other numbers here that you can go ahead and look at OMBReviews.com, which is my website where I post all of these numbers. But yeah, things are not looking good for Disney. Again, Disney with Jungle Cruise is looking to have, what, $150 million loss, probably best case scenario, with films like Black Widow, even if you account for the Disney Plus numbers, which you really can't, especially with the lawsuits. You're looking at another film that's going to be between $50 and $100 million loss for that studio. And you go back just down the line of all of their releases so far, and almost every single one of them since the pandemic started about a year and a half ago, which, remember, all started off with Onward, which was a massive $200 million loss for them. You're looking at these movies and saying, okay, I don't know exactly where you're making the money back. Obviously, one can assume investments, the fact that they are a giant corporation, things like ESPN, etc. But all of the places that I can think of are all underperforming or were closed for a very long time. You know, the theme parks, which are typically a huge moneymaker, they were closed for a very long time. They are implementing mask mandates and all these other things, which are going to have an impact on their numbers. You take into account ESPN. Those numbers are also down because ESPN went political and ended up losing a lot of people. Also, a lot of people aren't really watching a lot of sports like they were before the pandemic, which you would think would be the opposite case, but that's just kind of where we are right now. So it is just interesting to me that there are a lot of people that still try to justify the massive amount of money that Disney is worth, even though when I'm looking at them, just even based on box office numbers and just basic, understanding of their other areas, I don't see where their money is coming from. And I would think that if you wanted to really look into them, IRS, you might actually find some interesting things, because I don't know how their financials are making any sense based on the numbers that we are being given. Remember that they have even more $200+ million films that are set to come out even just this year that are likely not going to be able to make their money back. If even Black Widow, which actually had a fan base behind it, even that movie was not able to make massive profits, how can you expect a movie like Shang-Chi or a film like The Eternals to make its money back? It's just not looking good for them at all. But anyway, that is the box office breakdown for this weekend. What are your thoughts? Do you think that Jungle Cruise is going to somehow make it back next week, or that the Disney Plus numbers are going to be insane over the week? I don't see it, but maybe you're seeing something that I'm not. Also, have you seen any of the other films that I have mentioned? Are you excited to see a film like Snake Eyes failing? Do you think that Old deserves to make money? I personally don't think it does, but hey, at least some movies are making money at the box office, and that just kind of throws a wrench in the entire narrative of anyone saying, hey, well, we can't make money because pandemic, because COVID. It's like, well, I can list off several films this year that have already made profits, and some of them actually cost close to $100 million, but they actually made films that people wanted to see and didn't overspend on these massive, giant CGI fest digital noise machines like Jungle Cruise that clearly people don't want to go watch. And it's interesting because if you look to Deadline in their article, they try and point out that because Dwayne Johnson has a massive social media following, that somehow that is dragging this movie along. But if this is what it looks like to drag a movie along and to help a movie out, I would hate to see this movie without that level of social media support. Because as I mentioned, stars don't sell tickets to movies anymore in this capacity. And I think $61 million worldwide is a clear example of that fact. But anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, light up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey. Also, check out the top link if you want to find out ways to support the channel through Patreon, through Subscribestar, through Locals. I also have a Ko-fi account now as well, because I know that there might be some people that like to use that kind of stuff. All that stuff will be available in that top link, so go check that out if you want to follow me on social media or support the channel. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Time to get back to the family. Have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my July Patreon and Subscribestar members: Andrew Hoyle, Biffer de Hobbit, Brian P., Dion, Don Bruno de la Mancha, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father, Father Damian Cook, Garrett Searles, Harold Francis, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toone, Jonathan Carney, Laura, the Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin with the beautiful hair, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Teresa Martin, Theodore Bendon, Tina B, and Tina Bojan. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on Patreon, and also to my Subscribestar members: Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, John B, Perpetual Punster, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J. Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK Man. And I also want to make sure to shout out my Locals members. I am now available over at locals.com, and I've got 2 monthly supporters over there. The first of my local supporters is Goblin Squatch. Shout out to you, good sir. And also, I now have a second supporter over on locals.com, and that is Robert Barnes. Shout out to both of you very much. Thank you very much for supporting me on that new platform at the Keeper of the Bifrost level. If you want to find out more information about that, go check out my Locals page. You can find the link in the description, and it tells you everything that you would get in that Keeper of the Bifrost level, which is right now the only level available on that platform. And I also want to make sure to shout out any new Patreon members, and for right now, I want to shout out Mondo Spieler, who is my newest member over on Patreon. And I also want to add my newest Locals members, Cats App and The Real It. Thank you very much for being new members and supporters over on Locals. Thank you all very much for being here today. And if you want to have your name shouted out at the end of every single live stream and video on the channel, please make sure to check out the links in the description of ways that you can support me over on Patreon and Subscribestar as well. It gives you access to things like giveaways of Blu-rays, 4Ks, and digital codes. Also, access to a podcast that I do with John the Flickpick Flickinger, where we have a lot of fun. We also answer Q&A questions as well. And also you might get access to the Chosen of Valhalla level, which gives you access to a once-a-month podcast exclusively where I bring on you to the main channel with everyone else who is at the level, and we all just talk about movies, pop culture, and tons of fun stuff like that. And also, of course, Tina, who is the Empress of the Universe, is going to give us tons of reviews of movies and also maybe a couple of awesome rants here and there as well. So if that sounds fun to you, make sure you go ahead and check out those links. Again, you're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.